I wanted to start off with an overview of what we're going to talk about today. Of course, we're here to talk about route networks within the ArcGIS Indoors environment. And as Bill mentioned, this is part 3 of 3. We had some previous sessions that touched on things like the points of interest and transitions. Today, we want to focus on the routing part and creating these routes. So we will touch on requirements, and I'd like to talk more about those and what's needed as far as software and licensing. We'll also look at the need for points of interest, and we'll talk about the process. We're going to outline just at a high level, what are the steps you need to go through to make this happen in order to get your route networks published. And then we will I'll have Sam review a little bit on the publishing, as well as kind of optimizing what he's done in some of his experiences with a particular project he's working on as far as the route networks themselves. And then lastly, we'll just touch a little bit on the publishing workflow there. So as far as requirements goes, first of all, for those who might not be familiar with ArcGIS Indoors, it's a special configuration of ArcGIS geoprocessing tools that are packaged with web app templates as part of this configuration. Two of those templates that are configurable, one is called the Indoor Viewer, and the other one is the Space Planner. And the Space Planner is fairly new within the Indoors. It's especially popular with people returning to work with COVID and trying to plan out office space and where people can move to. And I think we've got, if we don't have content on that, we will soon, coming to a webinar near you, I guess we could say. But the purpose is for the Indoors solution is to allow organizations to integrate indoor mapping information from CAD or GIS or scan data, to integrate that indoor mapping information with their existing GIS maps. And that would, in turn, you end up with a central facility asset data solution for your campus or facility. So a centralized place to visually interact with this framework to manage your campus or your sites or your facilities. And it provides added value through improved decision-making and operational efficiencies. So that's really what ArcGIS Indoors is all about. So in order to use it, there's your requirements. And I know right now, I believe we're up to 2.9, I want to say, for at least 2.8 for ArcGIS Pro. I can't remember off the top of my head, but you need a minimum of 2.6 for your version on ArcGIS Pro. You also need Portal. And this is, if you're using it with Enterprise, you're going to need Pro 2.6. You're going to need Portal at a level of 10.8.1 or later. And not only that, your portal has to be licensed for ArcGIS Indoors usage. That's very important. So you need more than just Pro and Enterprise. You're going to need that Indoors enabled extension on your Enterprise. For ArcGIS Online, you can also use Indoors on the ArcGIS Online environment. You have to, again, have Pro 2.6. You also have to have the ArcGIS Online Organization 8.2 or later. And again, your ArcGIS Online account has to be licensed with the Indoors extension. And then as far as skill sets, requirements, or prerequisites, you might say, that you're going to want to have as far as an editor or a user, you're going to want to have some familiarity with editing in the 3D environment. You're also going to want to be familiar with how to do geoprocessing in ArcGIS Pro. So some of those basics. Okay, points of interest is kind of a foundational component of the routing, and that's why I wanted to mention these today and the importance of having those. Points of interest are really key, especially when it comes to thinning your route network and optimizing that, because it has to look at points of interest as an ending to your routes. They are essentially connecting the dots. If you don't have points of interest, you don't have any dots to connect, you don't have any route network. So those points of interest need XYZ, and they can be high level examples like, things on a map, city, mountains, parks, or you can narrow those down even to the asset level, which is kind of where we're focusing on with Indoors. An example of that might be tracking all of your IT equipment, your PCs, your servers, printers, network devices, all within your facility. So it's really coming from the 10,000 foot level down to the more of the 1 inch level. So the process, what's involved with going through the process of creating these route networks. So for one, you have to have some floor plan data. Floor plan data for indoors. Again, there's an ArcGIS Indoors information model. That's a very important concept of the indoors solution. The information model is a pre-configured schema that Esri has through the solution. It gives you a place to plug in your data. So your floor plan, your units, your levels, it gives you a place to plug those in. If you're familiar with any of their older information models, such as the local government information model, those are the types. It's a similar type of concept where you plug your data in and the solution uses that data in that schema. So floor plan, you want to import your floor plan data, again, from CAD, GIS, or scan data is typically your sources for that. Then you want to import POIs, as we mentioned, the importance of those, having those points to connect to. And then the next process, and we'll kind of walk through some of these as we get into ArcGIS Pro, generate and thin pathways. Those are workflows that are part of Indoors, part of the solution that are built in. You're not going to be able to find those geoprocessing tools unless you are licensed with the Indoors solution. Then you want to create transitions. This is where the 3D need comes in, the 3D editing for these transitions. That's your stairways and your elevators. And then optimizing the route network. This is where you test it and you optimize it and you say, okay, what do we need to, what do we need to basically have or optimize to have the most efficient route between 2 points? I think that's important. So then publishing the route network is going to be the final step. And once we publish that route network, then it can be used in the Indoors templates. And I like to create these nerdy sayings here, but I said if POIs are the nerve endings, and that's what we referred to in our last webinar, POIs are the nerve endings of the Indoors network. And if that's the case, then route pathways are the neurotransmitters. And that's a word, honestly, I had to Google it because I wanted to know what is the part of the nervous system that connects the nerve endings, and it's neurotransmitters. We're gonna go with that today. So just kind of how we like to think of this whole route network as a living, breathing component of the Indoors environment. Okay, we are now moving into ArcGIS Pro for our demonstration portion of this webinar on creating route networks. And the first thing I wanted to mention was the importance of having your portal that you're using up here on the top right. I have an active ArcGIS portal that is enabled with the ArcGIS Indoors extension. That's very important. Whether you're using Portal or you're using ArcGIS Online, it has to be enabled with the ArcGIS Indoors extension if you want to be able to use some of these tools and the workflows necessary. So prior to creating my route networks, there's some things I need to do in order to get things in place for that. One of them, if I search for Indoors in my geoprocessing tools, I now have these enabled that come with the Indoors package. So first thing, I'm going to create an Indoors database. For this one, I'm actually going to select, I'm going to select mine here, this empty one for create route networks. And I'm also going to check that box. I want to make sure I check that to create Indoors network. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit run. And what we'll see is this is populating this empty geodatabase that I had created. It's populating that with the necessary data sets, feature data sets that are part of the Indoors network. By default, I believe these create in metric. If we look at that, we'll look at the spatial reference. Those are in Web Mercator auxiliary sphere. So be aware of that. If you do need to work in English units or state plane, you'll have to run a projection on those. But these are my feature data sets for Indoors. This is where all my layers are that I will add my building information, my site. So this would be like my campus boundaries, facilities, and then the levels within my facility, as well as the details, which is the walls and the doors. That's a line feature class. And then the units, which would be your rooms. So this is what's created by default in that data set. Then I also have network and prelim network. Preliminary network, these pathways and transitions, we'll talk a little more about here, but those are what we do first is we populate those with some of the Indoors tools. And then finally, when those are finished, we will have our final route network be incorporated into this feature data set called network. Landmarks are kind of intuitive there. They're landmarks that help us with directions and routing. Turn left at the big oak tree sort of thing. So that's what the landmarks feature class is. Pathways is basically my thinned pathways, which we'll talk more about. That is actually the routing, the final route network. It kind of looks like a circuit board, as we'll see. And then transitions would be your stairways and elevators. So that is what's going to connect floor to floor with your route network. And again, that's a line feature class. So if we look at a sample of this, we can see that I've already generated, done a little bit of work here. So what I have here, I'll just turn these units on and off to kind of bring some detail into these. First, I'll just start with my facility outline. You can see that here. This is the outer area of my facility I have. And then I have levels, which identify the different levels throughout the building. And I'm using my rangefinder here. I can toggle between those levels. And then I have units, which it breaks it down to my rooms. And I've only done a small portion here for this particular demonstration. But as I toggle again from floor to floor, I can see those rooms are changing somewhat. Okay, so I have my units, then my details. Again, these are my walls and doors. You can see that kind of bring your map to life there from your rooms, and the details really add a lot to it there, so we can start to see that. So what I've done here at this point is I have my preliminary pathways feature class and I have my final pathways feature classes added. I also have my transitions feature class added, my prelim transitions. Another important thing you have to have created is points of interest. So I have my points of interest. I have a handful of those here in my map. Points of interest are any area where you want your visitors or users to be able to navigate to. That may be a particular site, location. It could be a room specifically, or it could be something within the room, like a server system or a server room, and you want to navigate to a particular rack within that room. That might be an example of a point of interest. But point of interests are necessary to create your routing because the route has to have points to go to. I think I mentioned earlier that those are the nerve endings of our route network nervous system. So now that we have points of interest, we've got our units, levels, details, and we've got our facility. Now we can actually create our route network. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to look for pathways, and I see I have generate indoor pathways. So I'm going to run this geoprocessing tool and input level features. I give it my levels, my details, and my target pathways. This is going to be my prelim pathways for starters. Your lattice is actually going to be the rotation. So if for some reason my building is rotated on an angle in my map, then I might want to give that rotation value in here. Sometimes you have to tweak that rotation value to make sure your network lines up with your hallways and rooms, for example. So I wouldn't want a network coming across my hallway diagonally. I want that to be aligned with my hallways. So that's important, that lattice rotation. Lattice density is basically going to be your spacing of your network. So if we turn on the prelim network we've got, my lattice is the distance between these vertices on that. And you can see my rotation looks good because it really aligns well with my hallways there. Restricted unit features. This is important. This is how you tell it, hey, don't go through my walls. Excuse me. In this case, restricted units is referring to rooms. If for some reason I did not want any navigation to go through this conference room, or I didn't want any navigation going in my route network going to this server room, I would limit that here. If I wanted it to be off limits to navigation, I could restrict those units here. Or if I had an atrium where obviously it's open air, I could also restrict that here under restricted units. So that's important. We can do that. It's going to use my details layer to say, hey, don't go through walls. Don't go through something that is there in the details. And I can add those expressions here to limit that. I can say where my use type is equal to door if I want to do that, or walls in this case. So that's how I run the tools for the generate indoor pathways. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to run it here since I already have I've already have the data processed just for the sake of time. So that's preliminary pathways. Then next, I'm going to thin those pathways. This is an important step. Again, we see that tool up here, thin indoor pathways. And this is actually going to produce what I call the circuit board. It's going to optimize these pathways here for my routing. If we have this preliminary network that we use and we try to set up our route network, there's so many pathway possibilities that it's going to really stress out my routing service, and it's going to take a long time. So we're trying to optimize that. So to give you an example, and just to walk through these parameters, you can input your levels, your pathway features would be my preliminary pathways, my transition features, and we'll get into these in a minute. And again, these are your elevators, your stairs, and then routable locations. It wants to know your points of interest here, and you can minimize those or run a query on those, whatever you want to pull from them. My target pathways is now going to be my final pathways, and my target transitions, of course, that'll be my final transitions. So this is what allows it to, the search tolerance allows you to designate how far do you want the routable features how far do you want those to look for those away from your pathways. So my points of interest, so in this case, it's using 5 meters. And then the neighbor solve count is basically the number of neighboring locations that'll be solved and calculating between those routes with that. So we're going to go ahead and I'll run this. I'm not going to run it now, but I would click the run there. I would no environments to set up there. But I wanted to show you what the finished product looks like in this case. Here I have my prelim pathways, and then this is what my final thinned pathways look like, an optimized network. And you can see this one needs a little cleanup here, but just wanted to give you kind of an example of what that might look like as we go from a thinned, from a preliminary full pathway environment to a thin pathway environment. Okay. So after we thin pathways, one of the things that we want to do next, we want to be able to create our transitions. So for this, I'm going to go into the 3D environment, and I could start out by generating transitions here. If we look for that, I could generate floor transitions between my floors. Personally, I generally like to try to do this manually. If I can, just for me, I like to be able to draw those in. So we have a whole separate webinar that we've recorded about creating transitions. You can feel free to look on our website for that one. But we do get into much more detail on how to create these actual transitions, specifically editing in the 3D environment. But you can see here, I've got transitions created for my stairwells and then also for my elevators. And the elevators, you can see it's just a vertical shaft straight up and down. Okay, so that's kind of it for creating those route networks. I would want to go in after that, and I would want to optimize my route network. So once I actually thin my pathways, then at that point I would get after I thin my pathways, I would get an actual network that I created. Here, we've got a preliminary network data set that it created once I thinned those pathways. And if I go to properties, there's all kinds of settings here that you can get into and adjust in order to look at things like time, the number of things that you want to use to calculate which is the most optimal path to take. And you can really get into a lot of detail here, but for the sake of time, we're not going to dive into these in too much detail for this webinar, but this may be something we look at in the future for a future webinar, is how to go through these settings and adjust those to make your network data set more optimal. So, Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sam. Sam is going to show us a little bit more of the pathways in action and what those look like. So Sam, make sure I can let you share your screen. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here and you can take over.
All right, so thank you for your part, John. So I'm going to walk you through my experience creating this network for the full indoors campus that we have here. This, for example, really fast, is 2 buildings in an outdoor engineering campus. We can see these 2 buildings right here. And actually, I like to be able to just rotate, and you can see all the different levels. You can see the below ground area of them as well. And while I'm speaking of that, just something really important to know when you navigate through a network, especially in a 3D environment, is how to actually navigate around the map. So you can use the Explore tool to kind of click around and drag, and you can click down your scroll wheel, the middle mouse button, to actually rotate the screen. But the second when you get off of the when you get off the Explore tool, you can't really drag. However, you can hold the C button and it basically activates the Explore tool again. And something important is whenever you rotate the screen, you're going to want to rotate on a selectable part of the network. So I'm rotating around the point where I just clicked. If I were to click often here in this white space, I would rotate around the white space and kind of lose where I'm at. So that's just something important to know so you don't fly around the screen, because I know definitely when I got into this new environment, I had a tough time being able to find the data. But here's some examples like John was talking about. Here's some transitions in the map. We can see through the green. I just did it. We can see through the green line right here. And it really likes to do that sometimes. But to actually explore the network, which is one of the most important parts, you're going to want to run some tests on it. So John showed you that we have this network data set within the map. And from here, we can actually explore the network. If I turn it on, the network populates underneath the map, which is kind of frustrating, especially in the 3D environment. If you're editing on top, you would like to see it in the elevated 3D portion. But you can see the general connectivity of the pathways and see where it starts and stops. And you can walk through it that way. Or there's a different way, which I find to be the easiest way and the recommended way, is to create a service area, as you can see these 2 layers right here. So to create a service area, we want to have this network data set in the map. And then we want to be able to go into service area. We're going to want to first, to start it, you're going to go to analyses. From here, you can find your network analyses. Now, this network analyses is only available to be used when you have this network data set in the map. For example, if I were to remove that, it would typically graze out. Can you stop? I guess So you can find these network analyses through the analysis ribbon. In here, you can select the analyses to use. Specifically for indoors, you're going to want to use these top 3, the service area, the route, and the closest facility. And service area will be the best to help you make sure that your network is completely built. So I could click that, and it's going to populate its own layer, and it'll automatically insert it into the contents. So I can see that everything's in here. And if I click on this, there we go, just wasn't popping up. It'll pop up with its own section in the ribbon to implement some features in this analysis. The most important part is importing your facilities, is where you're going to start your service area from. The best thing to do is to use a facility in one of the top parts of the network to make sure that it can connect from the top all the way to the bottom. So I actually already have 2 facilities in the map, and I already have some service areas ran. So I started a facility right here at one of the front meeting rooms of Beckman, and at the top entrance of ECE, not entrance, but roof access. So clicking on that and actually going to see the service area, if I turn it on and run it, go through, you can see my service area, you can see my facility pop up, and that would be through this import facilities button. It's a pretty easy process. You just have to make sure that you have your facilities layer selected, and you're just going to say that you're going to import any selected point of interest that you select. And once you do that, it will show you a full network. And the reason why I have the lines in different colors right now is just because I was seeing how different. I'm sorry, can we? All right, sounds good. So we could see that we have these facilities right here. Once we input those as usable facilities in the service area, you can press run on the service area. And in a future webinar, we can go deeper into that. But once we run it, you can see this facility turned on, it's loading the lines, and we can see that the full network is connected. The reason why the lines are different is just because I was testing out different costs of traveling down the network. It's less time to walk to the yellow areas than the red areas, but we can tell it's connected, which is nice. Another thing you can do, which is nice to test out in this side, is to test some routes in the network before you publish it. So going in here, the same way you loaded those facilities, you can load 2 stops in your route. Once you press run, it will route through your network and it will just create a line down. As you can see, it routes from this top meeting room all the way down these transitions, the stairwell, to a floor on the bottom floor to the basement, actually. And then just to kind of show you some bigger stuff, you can even get kind of crazy with it and you can create a large route using everything. But that's everything.
And why Sam's touching on that, or if I could just comment on that, you can also restrict it to wheelchair accessibility only, which would take them to an elevator instead of the stairs.
Yeah.
That's something you can set up in the route network data set, correct, Sam?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that would be set up in here in a different travel mode. So this is just showing the full network in use, being able to connect from each building to the outdoor network to another inside of another building. So that's that part. The publishing environment for indoors is actually pretty easy. And this gets into the other 2 analysis layers that I talked about. For this part, you just got to set up a new map and you have to throw in your network analyses layer. Now, I always like to remove these. You have to remove the base maps. So once you have this in here, like I said, now you can go into the network analysis and you're going to want to add a closest facility. And it's going to create and it's going to populate that in the side. And you're going to want to add a route. Now, this is actually all you need to do. After you do these 2 steps, you can see them both displayed on the left. You want to remove your network data set from that map. Oops, don't press group, you want to remove it. And then from there, you can share this map as its own web layer. If you make sure you're in it, you can go in here, you can fill in all your details, like for example, network analysis service, give it your details. You're gonna want to share it as a map image layer, make sure it's in the right portal, share it with your appropriate setup. And the most specific part you're going to want to do is check the configuration, and you're going to want to make sure it's checked for network analyses capabilities. After that, you're pretty much good to analyze and publish, and you should be able to use your portal, or you should be able to use your service. Showing what it actually looks like in the Indoors tools, you can publish it, and it's going to be published in a layer. From here, you can configure it in a map, configure applications, and you can add it to a service. From there, you can go in and you can actually start using it within your application. So for example, you can see my full network, or you can't see my network, but you can see the area I'm using for this network data. I can zoom in to my buildings and see the inside of it. And let's say I want to route from this building from, we have a guest speaker in meeting room 20, let's say, and we want to bring them to an office after that. So if I try to find meeting room 20, meeting 20, search. So I want to bring it from meeting room 20, and I want to create some directions all the way to, I'm going to say office 98. See it walk through the network. So from meeting room 20, which I know is on level 5 right here, I can go look at level 5. I can see that the thick line is the floor I'm on, and it goes routes upwards to the stairwell. And we can actually walk through this, takes the stairway down, and then it goes all the way down to level 2. Once we get to level 2, we're going to exit it. We're going to take a right from the stairwell, take another right, and we're going to take the left and finish up in the office. So that's just an example of how to use it through the Indoor Viewer application. Very robust application with a lot of capabilities. So yeah, get started with using networks in your data.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sam.